You have nothing here, Adelaide. You never did. Those were the last words her husband said to her after 26 years of marriage, spoken in a voice colder than any winter the hills of Pennsylvania had ever sent down. And just like that, at 64 years old, Adelaide Hartwell stood on a sidewalk in suburban Virginia with one squeaking suitcase, a plastic bag of mismatched essentials, $80 in her pocket, and a phone battery dying at 38%. Across the street, a neighbor froze mid-sweep, the broom hanging in the air, the way strangers watch a car accident. But Adelaide did not look back at the house. Looking back would mean seeing the wreckage, and she did not have the strength left for that. What she did not know yet, what no one in that quiet cul-de-sac could have guessed, was that her husband had been planning this exact afternoon for 18 years. That a black SUV had already driven 300 miles north to ask questions about a piece of land she had not thought about in decades. And that her father, a soft-spoken man, dead now for 14 years, had buried something behind a thicket of brambles on a forgotten mountain. Something he sealed in concrete and left waiting with 3 quiet words written in his own hand. Adelaide will understand. She was about to learn that the man who threw her away had made one fatal mistake. He thought she had nothing. You have nothing here, Adelaide. You never did. Those were the last words her husband said to her after 26 years of marriage, spoken in a voice colder than any winter the hills of Pennsylvania had ever sent down. And just like that, at 64 years old, Adelaide Hartwell stood on a sidewalk in suburban Virginia with one squeaking suitcase, a plastic bag of mismatched essentials, $80 in her pocket, and a phone battery dying at 38%. Across the street, a neighbor froze mid-sweep. The broom hung in the air the way strangers watch a car accident. But Adelaide did not look back at the house. Looking back would mean seeing the wreckage, and she did not have the strength left for that. The afternoon sun pressed down on her shoulders. 3 o'clock. Hot. Indifferent. Dust drifted in the air around her like small witnesses watching and saying nothing. She forced her feet to move. One step, then another. The wheels of her suitcase clicked against the cracked sidewalk, a small, pathetic music. She walked to the end of the block and turned the corner. There stood an old maple tree, the one she had planted flowers around 12 years ago, back when she still believed in things. She leaned her back against the rough bark, closed her eyes, took 3 deep breaths, and only then did she let herself feel it. The hollowness, as if a giant, invisible hand had reached into her chest, grabbed everything that mattered, and squeezed until there was nothing left. She thought about him. Russell, 26 years of him. The man she had cooked for, cleaned for, apologized to, listen to. The man she had built her entire identity around. She thought about the morning he had sat across from her at breakfast, reading his newspaper, sipping his coffee just like every other morning, as if today were nothing. Then He had folded the paper, set it down, and looked at her with eyes she had never seen before. "We need to talk." 3 words. A door closing. He had walked her to the antique bureau in the study, the one his grandfather had built, the one she had polished every Sunday for 2 decades. And then he had done something she did not know was possible. He pressed a hidden panel. A drawer slid open, a drawer she had never known existed. 26 years of marriage. And there were drawers in her own house she did not know existed. Inside that drawer were papers, stamped, notarized, signed, with a finality that made her stomach turn. He pushed them toward her. "Sign these final releases, or leave with exactly what you're carrying right now." Adelaide had stared at him. The man she shared a bed with. The man whose shirts she had ironed 3 days ago. The man who suddenly looked like a stranger wearing her husband's face. "Russell, what is this?" "It's the truth, Adelaide. The house is mine. The land is mine. The accounts are mine. They have been mine for 18 years. She had blinked. 18 years. "I moved everything into a private trust long before today. I'm a businessman. I plan ahead." His voice held no anger, no cruelty. That was the worst part. He spoke to her the way a man speaks to a vendor whose contract has expired. "Sign them, or you walk out with what you can carry." And she had signed. Not out of weakness, but because the ice in his eyes told her that staying was more dangerous than leaving. Now she stood under the maple tree 20 minutes later. A woman with no house, no bank account, no name on any deed. 64 years old. A ghost in her own life. She pulled out her phone, stared at the contact list. The screen dimmed. She tapped it back to life. Her sister Glinda lived 300 miles away, a small house in upstate New York, a husband named Walt, 2 grown sons and their families crowding every holiday, already at capacity. Her daughter Marlo lived in Richmond, a studio apartment, a boyfriend Adelaide had never quite trusted, a girl living paycheck to paycheck. She scrolled, hesitated, tapped Marlo's name. The phone rang, once, twice, 3 times. "Mom, what's up? I'm right in the middle of a shift." Adelaide opened her mouth. Nothing came out. "Mom! Marlo, your father put me out." Silence, a long silence, the kind that carries weight. "What do you mean, like for a walk?" Adelaide closed her eyes harder. "No, I mean, I'm standing on a sidewalk with a suitcase. The house was never mine. I have nowhere to go." More silence. Behind it, the muffled clatter of a busy restaurant. Someone laughing. A glass breaking. "Mom, I'm at work. I can't talk about this right now. Can I call you back tonight?" "Yes, you can call me back." The line went dead. 2 hours passed. She found a cheap motel near the interstate. The kind of place that smelled like industrial lemon cleaner and cigarettes from a decade nobody wanted to remember. Mustard-colored walls. A bedspread with a stain she did not want to think about. She sat on the edge of the bed and counted the money in her wallet again. $80. The phone rang. Marlo. Mom, I'm here. Sweetheart, listen, I've been thinking about what you said and I want to help. I really do. But things are tight here, Mom. Rent's behind. Tyler lost his hours. The studio, it barely fits 2 people. Adelaide did not say anything. You're going to be okay though, right? A pause. You always find a way, Mom. You're the strongest person I know. Adelaide stared at the mustard-colored wall. She wanted to say something, anything. She wanted to scream into the phone. No, Marlo, I am not the strongest person you know. I am tired. I am bleeding inside. I need my daughter. Instead, she said, Thank you, baby. I love you. And she hung up. She sat there for a long time, wondering when being strong had stopped being a choice and started being a requirement of the body like breathing. She slept badly. Of course she did. At 3 a.m, she got up, walked to the cracked motel mirror, turned on the dim yellow bulb above it, and she looked at herself. Really looked. For the first time in 26 years, she saw a woman of 64, hair faded to the color of ash and frost, eyes tired, a face that had been trained to smile at a man who did not deserve smiles. She saw a wife, a mother. She did not see Adelaide, because Adelaide had been buried somewhere a long time ago. She whispered to the woman in the mirror, Who are you? The woman in the mirror did not answer, because she did not know yet. The next morning, the phone rang again. Glinda. Her sister's voice was sharp, furious, the kind of fury that cuts through grief like a blade through old rope. Della, I just heard from Marlo, and then I called that miserable man you married. Got nothing but his voicemail where I left a message I will not repeat in polite company. Adelaide almost smiled. Almost. Della, listen to me. I've been up all night thinking. We don't have room here. Walt's back is acting up again. The boys are coming for the holidays. But there is one thing. A pause. Do you remember Daddy's old place? Adelaide stopped breathing for a second. The Hartwell farm. Yes, up in the hills, 40 miles outside Scranton. 18 acres of stubborn earth. Glinda, it's been empty for over a decade. But the taxes have been paid out of the estate account every single year. The deed is sitting in my drawer. Half of it is yours. Adelaide closed her eyes. The image came back to her slowly the way a photograph develops in a chemical bath. A sagging porch, a stone chimney, a hand pump in the kitchen, a father with dirt under his fingernails. Glinda, the last time we were there was for the funeral, 14 years ago. The house was falling apart back then. It's a roof, Della. It's ugly. It's old. It probably needs 1,000 repairs. But it is half yours. Cousin Walt drove up 2 summers ago to check the fence lines. He said the structure is still standing. The bones are good. A long pause. It's better than a Motel Della. It's better than a park bench. Adelaide stared at the mustard wall. She had no other cards. She had no other names on any deed in this entire country, except one. Hartwell. Okay, Glinda. Okay. The bus ride to northern Pennsylvania took nearly 7 hours. She sat by the window and watched Virginia's lush greens slowly give way to something rougher, rockier, older. The Appalachian foothills rose around the highway like the spines of sleeping animals. She felt something happening to her, a stripping away. Not a bad feeling, just different. Like layers of old paint being scraped off a piece of wood to find the grain underneath. She thought about her father, Samuel Hartwell, a soft-spoken man, a man of many silences. He had spent weeks at a time on that farm when she and Glinda were children, always claiming he was mending fences or checking the soil. He would come home with dirt under his fingernails and a quiet satisfaction in his eyes that she had never understood. He had never made the farm profitable, not in any way the bank could measure, and yet they had never wanted for anything. He had always found the money for a new roof, for Glinda's college tuition, for Adelaide's wedding dress, money that seemed to come from thin air. She had never asked where it came from. She had been a daughter. Daughters did not ask. She wondered now. For the first time in her life, she wondered. The bus pulled into the small town of Coldwater on a Wednesday afternoon. The sky was the color of wet slate. The air smelled like coming rain and old leaves. A local taxi driver picked her up. A man with a weathered face and eyes that had seen many things and did not need to talk about any of them. He drove her the final 5 miles out to the old Hartwell property. When he pulled up at the rusted iron gate, he looked at her suitcase, then at the empty road behind them, then at her. "You sure about this, ma'am?" "I'm sure. There hasn't been a soul out here in years. Nearest neighbor's a good 3 miles back." "I know." He nodded, did not push. She paid him with 2 of her precious bills. He tipped his hat and drove away. The taillights disappeared around the bend, and then it was just her, and the gate, and the silence. The gate groaned in protest as she pushed it open. A high metallic shriek echoed across the valley. She walked the final half-mile up the dirt drive, the wheels of her suitcase clicking rhythmically against the stones. When the house came into view around a bend in the overgrown path, she stopped dead. It was worse than she remembered. A shutter hung by a single hinge. The front porch sagged like a tired old dog. One of the windows was broken, a sheet of plastic flapping against the frame, but the chimney still stood. Tall stone, defiant against the gray sky. And for the first time since Russell had thrown her out for the first time in 3 days, Adelaide cried. not for the house she had lost, but for the exhaustion of being the woman who always finds a way. She cried for the 26 years she had spent building a life on shifting sand, only to discover that her father had left her a foundation of solid stone. After a few minutes, she wiped her face with the back of her hand. She stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked, but held. The door wasn't even locked. The wood had swollen so much from years of humidity that it was jammed into the frame. She threw her shoulder against it twice before it gave way with a violent thud. Inside, the air was thick. Dust, old paper, damp wood. The faint smell of a roof that had given up a shingle to the last winter storm. She stood in the entryway and listened. The silence was different here. Not empty, full, like the silence inside a church. She walked through the house slowly. The kitchen, the cast iron stove rusted but intact. The hand pump at the sink. She worked the handle once, twice, 5 times, 12 times, and then a stream of cold, clear water. She laughed. A short, surprised sound. Mountain water. After all these years, the mountain had been kinder to her than her own family. In the parlor, an old armchair sat under a sheet. Faded wallpaper peeled in soft curls. A framed photograph hung crooked on the wall. Her father, her mother, a summer day. All 3 of them younger than memory could hold. She straightened the frame. It felt important somehow. In the master bedroom, she found an iron bed frame. The mattress had been carried away long ago, but the frame was solid, the springs intact. She would sleep here. She folded her winter coat into a pillow and spread her sweaters across the springs. It would have to do. For dinner that first night, she ate a tin of sardines and some crackers from the bus station, washed down with metallic-tasting water from the pump. And as the sun went down behind the ridge, plunging the valley into a deep velvet darkness, she sat by the window and watched the stars come out. The silence was absolute, a heavy blanket, both protective and terrifying. She fell asleep with her boots still on. The next 4 days passed in a blur of basic survival. She found an old broom in the pantry and swept years of cobwebs from the corners. Dead insects, mouse droppings, the brittle skeletons of forgotten things. She scrubbed the kitchen floor on her hands and knees until the linoleum showed its original pale blue pattern, a pattern her mother had probably stood on 40 years ago. Her hands blistered. Her back ached. She did not care. She used a roll of heavy plastic and some duct tape to seal the broken window in the parlor. Cousin Walt had left a few supplies in the shed 2 summers ago. Bless him. By the 3rd night, the house began to feel like a place. Not a home, not yet, but a place, a shelter, a piece of the world where her name was not being erased. It was on the 4th day that she found the first strange thing. She had taken an old rusted machete from the tool shed. She wanted to clear the path to the creek. The waist-high weeds had swallowed it completely. She hacked her way through the brush. Sweat ran down her back. Her arms ached. The machete was dull and heavy and cruel. But she kept going, because moving forward was the only direction she had left. Near the back fence line, she stopped. Something was wrong, or not wrong. Different. A patch of ground about 6 feet long and 3 feet wide where the grass grew thin, where the soil looked darker, almost black compared to the rocky clay all around it. She stood there, the machete resting against her leg. A trench. That was what it looked like. A trench that had been dug and then filled in and then forgotten. Too regular to be a collapsed animal burrow. Too deliberate to be erosion. She told herself it was probably an old irrigation attempt. Her father had been stubborn about water. She told herself that. But she did not quite believe it. She kept walking toward the creek, 20 yards farther, and then, hidden behind a thicket of blackberry brambles, half buried in moss and vines, she saw it. A low concrete structure, no more than a foot above the ground, with a heavy mossy lid, like a miniature bunker, or a very small reinforced root cellar. She approached it carefully. Her heart was suddenly loud in her ears. She tapped the lid with the handle of the machete. The sound that came back was deep, hollow. It vibrated up through her boots and into her bones. She tried to lift the lid. It did not move. It did not even pretend to move. She stood there, in the late afternoon light, listening to the creek run somewhere beyond the brambles, and she felt for the first time in her life that her father had been a man she did not actually know. That night, sleep would not come. She kept thinking about him. Samuel Hartwell, the soft-spoken father. The man who trusted the earth more than the banks. The man who had spent weeks at a time on this farm, always claiming, always coming home with dirt under his fingernails. Always. She remembered the satisfaction in his eyes. She had thought it was just a farmer's contentment. Now she wondered. She wondered what kind of man builds a concrete bunker behind blackberry brambles and tells no one for 30 years. She got up, lit a kerosene lamp she had found in the pantry, walked to her father's old wardrobe. The wood was warped, the doors creaked. She ran her hand along the back panel, a loose board. She pulled it. Behind it, a small leather-bound book. She brought it to the kitchen table and opened it. Most of the pages were blank, but on the last written page in her father's slanting, irregular hand were the words, "Della will understand. When the time comes, the land will speak to her. Ask Opal." She read those words 100 times. She did not understand them. but she was beginning to feel that she would. Soon. On the 5th morning, she walked the 3 miles into town. Coldwater was a small place, a general store, a post office, a diner, a gas station with a single pump. The kind of town where everyone's grandfather had known everyone else's grandfather. She entered the general store. A bell chimed above the door. The owner looked up from a crate of apples. An old man, late 60s or early 70s, thick spectacles, hands that had handled a lot of life. His eyes narrowed when he saw her. She picked up a few essentials. Flour, coffee, a small box of nails, a pound of cheese. She set them on the counter, and before she could lose her nerve, she said, "Mr. Daly." He looked surprised that she knew his name. "That's me. My name is Adelaide Calloway, but I was born Adelaide Hartwell." The old man went very still. His hand stopped halfway to the cash register. "Samuel's girl." "Yes. The one who went down south." "Yes." A long pause. He set the bag of coffee down on the counter, slowly, like it was suddenly heavier than it had been a moment ago. Lord. He took off his glasses, wiped them on his shirt, put them back on. "Your father was one of the most soft-spoken men in this county. Came in here every Saturday morning for 30 years. Never said much, but his word was as good as gold." Adelaide felt something rise in her chest, something she did not have a name for. "You knew him as well as anyone could, which wasn't much." He almost smiled. "You moving back into the old place. For now, I'm trying to get it back on its feet." He nodded slowly. "You looking to farm it?" "I don't know yet. I'm figuring things out." He looked at her then, really looked. The way old men look at people with years of unspoken understanding behind their eyes. "You're going to need help up there. That place hasn't seen a man's hands in a long time." "I know. There's a young fella around here, Eli Boone, 32, spent 10 years as a military police investigator. Stateside, mostly a stretch of it overseas on training rotations. Came back with a careful way about him. Doesn't say much. But he's good with his hands, good with a shovel, and he keeps his mouth shut. Does odd jobs for folks. I can send him your way tomorrow if you want." Adelaide hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, please." She paid for her items. The bag was heavy in her hands. She turned to leave. That was when Mr. Daly leaned forward over the counter. His voice dropped. "Mrs. Calloway." She turned back. He was looking at her with a different expression now. Careful. Almost worried. "There was a man in here 2 weeks ago, asking questions about your father's land." Adelaide stopped breathing. "What kind of man?" "City man, not from around here. Suit, black SUV. Asked a lot of questions about the Hartwell property. Asked if it was still in the family." "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. Nothing worth knowing." She stared at him. "Mr. Daly, I only arrived 5 days ago. I know. He came 2 weeks ago. I know. A long silence. The bell on the door jingled as another customer entered. Mr. Daly straightened up. His professional smile returned as if he had not just dropped a small bomb at her feet. Well, Mrs. Calloway, you let me know if you need anything else, and I'll send Eli up tomorrow morning. Mr. Daly? Yes, ma'am. She hesitated. My father, did he ever mention a friend named Opal? The old man's expression softened. Opal Greer. Yes, she was your daddy's oldest friend. 50 years they knew each other. She still lives at the end of the old logging road. Last house before the trees take over. Is she still sharp? 78 years old. Doesn't get around much anymore. But her mind is intact. You should go see her. Adelaide nodded. She did not say anything else. She walked out of the store and into the gray afternoon light. She walked the 3 miles back to the farm slowly. Her bag of supplies grew heavier with each step, but her thoughts grew heavier still. Someone had been asking about her father's land 2 weeks ago, before she had even known she would come here, before Russell had even thrown her out. She turned the thought over in her mind like a stone she had pulled from a riverbed. How? How could anyone have known unless someone had been planning this? The way Russell had planned the trust 18 years in advance. She stopped walking. The bag of supplies hung from her hand. She thought about Russell's face when he had pushed those papers across the bureau. The complete absence of emotion. The professional stillness of a man closing a deal he had been working on for a long time. And then she thought, what if the deal wasn't only about the marriage? What if the deal had always been about the land? She stood in the middle of the dirt road. The wind moved through the pines above her. A crow called from somewhere far away. Her father had hidden a concrete bunker behind blackberry brambles for reasons she did not yet understand. A man in a black SUV had been asking about the property 2 weeks before she had even known she would come here. A 78-year-old woman she had never met was waiting at the end of a logging road, her father's oldest friend. And Russell Calloway, the man she had married at 38, had spent 18 years preparing to take everything from her. But he had not taken this. He had not been able to take this because this stubborn rocky earth had never been his to take. It had her name on it, the name she had been born with, Hartwell. That night, Adelaide sat on the sagging porch of the old farmhouse. The sun went down behind the ridge. The stars came out one by one the way they always did, the way they would long after she was gone, long after Russell was gone, long after everyone was gone. She wrapped her arms around herself. The mountain air was cool. The stars above the ridge were white and bright and very, very old. She thought of the woman she had seen in the motel mirror 4 nights ago. The woman who did not know who she was. Adelaide did not cry tonight. Tonight, for the first time in many days, she did something else. She made a fist, a small one, quiet in her lap. The kind of fist a woman makes when she has decided that she is not finished yet. The morning came soft and gray. Adelaide woke before the sun the way she had been waking for 40 years. Some habits do not leave a woman just because her marriage does. She made coffee on the cast iron stove. It tasted like smoke and metal and survival. She drank it standing at the kitchen window, watching the mist roll off the ridge. And then she heard it. An engine coming up the dirt drive. A pickup truck the color of rust and prayer, both held together by hope, rolled to a stop in front of the porch. The man who stepped out was tall, 32, broad shoulders, a scar across the back of his left hand. Eyes that did not waste time looking at things they did not need to look at. He nodded once. "Ma'am, Eli Boone. Mr. Daly said you had work." "I do." She came down off the porch. "He told me you keep your mouth shut." "He told me right." She studied him for a moment. The careful stillness of him. The way he stood with his weight balanced like a man who had learned to expect the ground to shift. "There's something on this property," she said, "down by the creek, behind the brambles. My father built it. Concrete, with a lid I can't lift." Eli's eyes moved to the tree line, then back to her. He did not ask why. He did not ask what was inside. He just said, "Then let's go look at it." She led him down the cleared path, past the trench in the dark soil, through the blackberry brambles she had cut with her own bleeding hands. And there it was, the concrete lid. Eli knelt down, ran a gloved hand along the seam where the lid met the base. He was quiet for a long moment. "That's high-grade concrete, ma'am," he said. "That is not the kind of thing you mix in a bucket. That's engineered, reinforced. There's steel rebar in there." He looked up at her. Whoever built this did not build it for a passing season. They built it for somebody to find, eventually, just not soon. Adelaide crossed her arms tight against her chest. "My father," she said. "He was the most ordinary man you ever met. Quiet, soft-spoken. He fixed fences and grew vegetables nobody bought." Eli stood up. He looked at the lid, then at the trench in the distance, then at her. "Ma'am," he said, "ordinary men don't bury reinforced concrete behind a blackberry patch and keep it secret for 30 years. The wind moved through the pines. Somewhere down the slope, the creek ran on the way it had been running since before her father was born, the way it would keep running long after the last of them was gone. Adelaide looked at the lid, at the dark seam of it, at the secret her father had sealed in stone and left waiting in the ground, with 3 quiet words written in his own hand. "No," she said softly. they don't. And she knew, standing there in the gray morning light, with the mountain rising silent behind her, that whatever was under that lid was going to change everything. That the man who had thrown her away with $80 and a squeaking suitcase had made a mistake he could not yet see, because he had thought she had nothing. And her father, 14 years in the ground, had known all along that she had everything. Eli Boone did not open the lid that first morning. He walked the perimeter of it twice. He knelt and pressed his palm flat against the cold stone, the way a doctor lays a hand on a patient before he says anything out loud. He measured the seam with the tape from his truck. He scraped moss away from the edges with the flat of a screwdriver. And then he stood up, wiped his hands on his jeans, and looked at Adelaide with those careful eyes. "This is going to take the right tools," he said, "and I want to do it slow. Whatever your father went to this much trouble to protect, I don't want to crack it open like a tin can. Give me a day. I'll bring what I need." Adelaide nodded. She did not argue. There was a steadiness in the man that she had not felt from anyone in a very long time. Not the loud confidence Russell used to wear like an expensive coat. Something quieter than that. The confidence of a man who had carried heavy things in worse places and had learned exactly how much weight a thing could take before it broke. "Tomorrow, then," she said. He nodded and climbed back into his rust-colored truck. But before he started the engine, he leaned out the window. "Ma'am, that man Mr. Daly mentioned, the one in the SUV?" He paused. "You want me to keep my eyes open?" So Daly had told him that too. Of course he had. In a town this small, a secret was just a piece of news that hadn't finished traveling yet. "Yes," Adelaide said. "I think I do." He nodded once more, and the truck rattled away down the drive. That afternoon, she walked to the end of the old logging road. She did not call ahead. There was no number to call. She just walked past the stand of birches her father had planted 40 years ago, past the broken stone wall a neighbor had built before she was born. The road got rougher, narrower. The trees pressed in. And at the end of it, just before the forest swallowed everything, a small wooden house came into view. It had been painted blue once. Now it was the color of a memory. A garden out front. Roses. Real roses. Old climbing roses with thorns the size of fingernails. The kind that grow only when someone has loved them for 50 years. A figure sat on the porch. A woman in a wicker chair wrapped in a wool shawl despite the warmth of the day. Her hair was white as bone. Her hands were folded in her lap. She was looking right at Adelaide as if she had been waiting for a very long time. Adelaide stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. She did not know what to say. The old woman looked at her, and tears began to slide down her face. Quiet, not sad, just full. "Samuel's girl. Yes. You came back. Yes. Took you long enough." A small laugh escaped Adelaide, surprised, watery. The old woman patted the chair beside her. "Come up here, Della. Come sit with me." Her name was Opal Greer, 78 years old. Her hands shook a little, not from fear, from age, from the small earthquakes the body holds when it has lived a long time. But her eyes were sharp, the kind of sharp that does not happen by accident. She poured tea from a chipped porcelain pot. Her hands trembled and the cup rattled against the saucer.
She did not apologize for it. Adelaide liked her immediately. "Your father told me you would come," Opal said. "When?"
Many times, over many years, she smiled at something Adelaide could not see. "He used to sit in that chair you're in now, every Sunday afternoon for 30 years. He'd drink my tea and tell me about his roof and his chickens and his daughters. And every single Sunday before he left, he would say the same thing." She paused. He'd say, "Opal, when Della comes home, you'll know what to do." And I'd say, "Samuel, what makes you think she'll come home?" And he'd give me that quiet smile of his, and he'd say, "Because the land remembers her name." Adelaide could not speak. The cup shook in her hand. "Opal, why didn't I know about you?" "Because your father was a man of compartments, like a steamer trunk. Each thing in its own drawer. Each drawer locked tight. He didn't want the locks to leak." A pause. "He was a good man, Della. Not a perfect man. Not a loud man. Not a man you could brag about at a dinner party. But a good man. The rarest kind." "Tell me about him, please." Opal set down her teacup. She looked out at the roses, and for a moment the years fell away from her face. "Your father loved a woman before your mother." Adelaide stopped breathing. "Her name was Lillian. They were going to be married. He was 25. She was 24. She got sick in the spring of 1965. She was gone by the fall." "I never knew." "Of course you didn't. He never spoke of her after she died. Not even to me. Not for years. But I knew. I'd known her too. We were schoolgirls together." A long silence. The kind that holds something heavy and does not flinch. "That is when your father learned too early and too cruelly that everything beautiful in this world can be taken from you. And once a man learns that lesson, Della really learns it. He never quite trusts beauty again. He hides it. He buries it. He builds walls around it to protect it from whatever comes next." Adelaide thought of the concrete bunker behind the brambles, the lid she could not lift, the trench in the dark soil. And suddenly she understood, or she was beginning to. "Opal, there's a concrete structure down by the creek, behind the brambles." The old woman nodded slowly. "I know." "Do you know what's in it?" "I have an idea." "Tell me." Opal turned her head and looked at Adelaide for a long moment. The kind of look that measures something. I'll tell you, but not today, child. Today is for tea and for sitting. Some truths have to wait until they're ready, and until you're ready for them. She reached over and put her trembling hand on Adelaide's. Open the lid first. Whatever you find under there, you bring it back to me. And then we'll talk. Eli came back at 9 the next morning. He pulled tools from the bed of his truck without wasted motion. A crowbar, a pry bar, a sledgehammer, a heavy-duty flashlight. A man who had unloaded equipment in worse places with worse stakes. The lid did not give easily. Eli worked for nearly an hour. The crowbar bent slightly. The pry bar slipped twice. He paused once to wipe his face with his shirt. Adelaide watched him work. She thought about her father, a man who had buried something so deep that 30 years and a stranger with a crowbar could barely uncover it. Then a scrape, a grinding sound. The lid shifted. Eli braced his legs and heaved, and the slab slid sideways with a long stone groan. A smell rose up from the dark hole, not rot, old earth, cold metal, dry paper. The smell of patience. Eli clicked on the flashlight and aimed it down. He went very still. Then he stepped back and handed her the light. This one's yours, ma'am. Inside the bunker sat a galvanized metal box the size of a footlocker. Heavy, ringed with rust along the seams. Beside it, 2 long cylinders wrapped in thick yellowed plastic. Eli lifted the box out first. It clinked solid objects shifting inside. He set it gently on the ground, then the cylinders. Carefully, as if they might break or wake up. Then he stepped back. Ma'am, I'll be on the porch. This is private. He left without another word. The kind of man who knew when to disappear. Adelaide carried the items back to the kitchen alone. She set the metal box on the table where her mother had once rolled out pie dough. She unwrapped the cylinders first. Her hands shook. The cylinders held maps, topographical maps, hand-drawn surveys, chemical analysis sheets from a laboratory in Scranton dated 1982. She set them aside. She looked at the metal box. The latches were rusted shut. She found a kitchen knife and worked the blade against the rust until the latches snapped open one at a time. She lifted the lid, and her breath caught. Stacks of currency, old 20s, old 50s, bound with twine, not millions, but thousands. More than she had ever seen in one place in her life. A leather-bound ledger, a small velvet pouch tied with string, and a thick envelope with her name on it in her father's slanting, irregular hand. Della. She sat down. Her knees just stopped holding her up. She picked up the envelope. The paper was thick, yellowed, heavy with the weight of 14 years of silence. She slid her thumb under the flap. 3 pages folded with care. Her father's handwriting filled them edge to edge. She began to read. Della. If you are reading this letter, then the world out there has not been as kind to you as I hoped it would be. I am sorry for that. I always knew you would be the one to come back. Glinda has the city in her blood. But you, Della, you always understood the silence of the hills. I have a secret to tell you. One I could not tell your mother. God rest her soul. When I bought this farm in 1974, I paid for 18 acres. 3 years later, I had a man named Otis Fells come out and run a private survey. The fence lines did not match the spine of the mountain. They never had. The county records were old and had been copied wrong somewhere along the way. And Otis found something. There are 8 extra acres on the other side of the creek, hidden behind the ridge. They had never been recorded, never been taxed, never been claimed. They sat there in the gap of the paperwork waiting, the way some things wait. I did not record it either. I was afraid the county would find a way to tax me out of existence. I was afraid the neighbors would start a feud. I was afraid of every man who has ever wanted something he did not earn. But Della, there is more. She paused, took a breath. The kitchen felt very still. Outside on the porch, she could hear Eli shifting his weight. A careful man. But there. She read on. Otis Fells was a miner before he was a surveyor. He took one look at the rock on those 8 acres and his face changed. He told me the stone there was different. High-grade calcite. Limestone so pure it could be used for the finest cement. For specialty industrial work. For things I do not understand and never tried to. He called it white gold. I had the lab in Scranton confirm it in 1982. The reports are in the cylinder you found. Every page sealed, notarized, real. I never tore the mountain open while I was alive. I did not have the heart for it, and I did not want the big companies coming in to rip the valley apart for whatever they could carry off. But over the years, I sold small loads to local contractors, by hand, with a borrowed truck and a bad back. Quiet sales, cash, nothing on paper. That is where the money came from, Della. That is how I paid for Glinda's college and your wedding dress and the new roof. All those years, your mother thought we had a guardian angel. It was just me with a shovel and a secret. I am sorry I never told you. I told myself it was to protect you. The truth is, I did not know how to talk about anything that mattered. A tear hit the page. She did not know when she had started crying. She lifted the paper so the tear would not smear the ink. Della, listen to me now. Even if my voice is dead and the ink is faded, I am not leaving you money. I am leaving you land. Money can be taken from a woman, by a husband, by a lawyer, by a court, by a clever man with paper. Land is harder. Land does not lie. Land does not forget who walked on it. Land remembers. If you ever find yourself with your back against the wall, and Della, if you are reading this letter, you already do use this. Use what I left for you. Do not let the sharks take it for nothing. This land is your shield, my girl. And one more thing. Go see Opal. Bring her this letter. She has something for you that I could not leave in a metal box. Some things have to be carried in human hands. I love you, Della. I always have. I just never knew how to say it loud enough. Dad. She set the letter down. She put her face in her hands, and she wept. Not the sharp grief of fresh loss. He had been gone 14 years. The sharpness had worn down long ago. She wept for a different thing. She wept for all the years she had not understood him, for the dirt under his fingernails, for the satisfaction in his eyes, for the Sunday afternoons at Opal's kitchen table, for the hours alone in this farmhouse, for a man who had carried so much for so long without ever asking anyone to share the weight. She wept because for the first time in her life she felt seen by a dead man when the living one she had married had spent 18 years preparing to erase her. She sat there for a long time. Eventually, she opened the velvet pouch. A pocket watch, her grandfather's. She remembered it from her childhood. The tick was gone now, but the engraving on the back was still legible. Tempus dat tempus aufert. Time gives, time takes away. She closed her hand around it. She did not need to ask why he had left it. Eli drove her back to Opal's house that afternoon. She held the letter in her lap and did not speak. He did not ask. The truck rattled up the logging road, the pines closing in on either side, and the world felt very small and very large at the same time. When they reached the blue house, Adelaide turned to him. Eli, will you wait? I think I'll need a ride home.
Yes, ma'am.
A pause.
And ma'am, whatever's in that box, you don't have to carry it alone. You know that.
She looked at him, at the scar on his hand, at the careful stillness of him, and she did not understand yet why a stranger would say a thing like that. But she nodded. Opal was on the porch. She had been waiting. She saw the letter in Adelaide's hand, and her old eyes filled with tears. You opened it. I opened it, and you came back. He told me to.
Opal nodded slowly. Sit down, Della.
Adelaide sat. The wicker chair creaked beneath her. Opal stood up slowly the way old women stand. A hand on the armrest, a pause to gather the body a second to find balance, and then forward into the house. She came back a few minutes later, carrying a wooden box. Polished cherry wood, the size of a thick book. She set it on the small table between them, sat down, folded her hands, and said, Your father gave me this box 26 years ago. He told me to keep it. He told me one day his daughter would walk up that road, and on that day, I was to give it to her. Adelaide stared at the box. What's in it? Letters, many of them, from Samuel, over 30 years, about everything, about the land, about the calcite, about Otis Fells, about every load he ever sold and to whom, about the dates, the amounts, the names, the receipts. She paused. And every single document Della, every survey, every lab report, every deed correction Samuel meant to file but never did. All of them notarized, witnessed, stamped, properly executed. Adelaide's mouth went dry. Notarized. Yes. By whom? Opal almost smiled. Different notaries, over many years, so no one could ever say there was a single source, so no one could ever say it was forged. A pause. He was a careful man, your father. Adelaide stared at the cherrywood box, and she understood suddenly what she was looking at. She was looking at 30 years of evidence, a complete chain of custody, ownership, use, sale, documentation, the kind of evidence no court could throw out, the kind of evidence a man builds when he knows deep down that someone someday will try to take everything. Opal, why did he give this to you and not to a lawyer? Because lawyers can be bribed, Della. Friends cannot. A pause. And because he trusted me with the one thing he never gave anyone else. What was that? Opal's eyes filled again. His silence. Adelaide could not speak. The old woman reached across the small table and took her hand. Della, listen to me. Your father did not hide this land because he was greedy. He hid it because he was afraid. He had already lost one woman he loved. He could not bear to lose anything else without a fight. She squeezed. But the time for hiding is over. The land wants to be known, and your father wanted you to claim it out loud, in daylight, without apology. Adelaide held the old woman's hand. She felt the small earthquakes there, the trembling of a body that had carried a long secret for a long time. Opal, I will. I know you will, child. She brought the cherrywood box home in Eli's truck and set it on the kitchen table beside the metal box. She did not open the letters yet. There were too many of them, and she was too full. She called Glinda that night. Her sister and Walt drove down within 48 hours. Glinda cried when she saw the metal box. She cried harder when she saw the cherrywood box. Walt, a man of few words, sat at the table for 3 hours and read every single document. He took notes. He cross-referenced dates. He measured the maps with a ruler he had brought in his briefcase. When he finally looked up, his eyes were grave. Della, if these reports are even half accurate, those 8 acres are worth more than the rest of this county combined. A pause. And your father knew it. I know. And he hid it for 50 years.
I know Walt. The moment word of this gets out, and word always gets out, there will be men coming up that drive. Bad men. Adelaide looked at her brother-in-law across the table. They've already started, Walt. What? She told him. About Mr. Daly. About the man in the black SUV. About the questions. 2 weeks before she had even known to come. The kitchen got very still. Glinda set down her coffee cup. Walt sat back, folded his arms, looked out the window, looked back at her. Then we move quickly, he said. Within a week, Adelaide had hired 2 people. The first was a geologist from a university in the eastern part of the state, a young woman with steady hands and a careful mind. She came up, took core samples, disappeared back to her lab, and came back 9 days later with a thick report. She set it on the kitchen table and said one thing. Mrs. Hartwell, your father's old friend was right. The calcite is real, high grade, specialty industrial quality, far rarer than the original 1982 report even suggested. The second person Adelaide hired was a lawyer, August Pierce, out of Scranton, a man in his 60s with a soft Pennsylvania accent and the eyes of a man who had buried more than one corporation in court. He specialized in mineral rights and quiet title disputes. He read the file. He whistled once. Mrs. Hartwell, your father was a careful man. Yes. This is the cleanest documentation chain I've seen in 20 years. Good. Whoever comes for this land, and someone will come, they will not win. Not with this in our hands. She nodded, and she felt something inside her chest unlock. Just a little. The black SUV came on a Thursday. Adelaide was on the front porch sweeping the boards Eli had repaired the day before. The SUV pulled up the dirt drive slowly, as if savoring the approach. A man stepped out. Expensive suit. Perfect haircut. The kind of man whose shoes had never been muddy. He smiled. The smile did not reach his eyes. Mrs. Calloway. That's right. My name is Victor Slade. I represent the Crown Land Group. We've been doing some regional scouting. We noticed this property has been dormant for some time. He spread his hands in old salesman's gesture. We'd like to make you an offer. $200,000 for the entire 18 acres. Cash. No questions. No. Mrs. Calloway, it's a generous offer for land in this condition. It's not for sale, and my name is Adelaide Hartwell. He paused, a flicker behind the eyes. Mrs. Hartwell, we know a great deal about your situation. We know about the divorce. We know about your financial position. This offer is a lifeline. It is not. If you refuse, we may have to look more closely at the irregularities of your father's old deed. It would be a shame for all this to get tangled up in court for the next decade. She did not flinch. She gripped the broom. Mr. Slade, get off my land. He looked at her, a long look, calculating. Then he nodded, slowly walked back to the SUV and opened the driver's door. He paused, turned. Regards from Mr. Calloway, Mrs. Hartwell. The door slammed. The SUV pulled away. The dust hung in the air. Adelaide stood on the porch, the broom still in her hand. Her ears rang. Russell. It had always been Russell, the 18-year trust, the black SUV before she had even arrived, the questions in the general store. He had not just been ending their marriage. He had been clearing the board for something, for this. Behind her, the screen door creaked. Eli stepped out. He had heard everything. Crown Land Group, he said quietly, watching the dust settle on the drive. I've heard the name. They don't scout. They strip. He looked at her. And that last thing he said about your husband. Ex-husband, Adelaide said. Eli nodded slowly. He did not say anything for a moment. Then, ma'am, there's something I should tell you about why I came up here, why Daly sent me, and why I'm not leaving. She turned to face him fully. All right. But Eli looked toward the tree line, then back at her and shook his head. Not tonight, he said. Tonight you've had enough, but soon. Because if Crown is moving and your husband is behind them, then this is going to get worse before it gets better. And when it does, you're going to need to know exactly what kind of man you've got standing on your porch. The sun was sliding down behind the ridge. The light came orange and brief across the valley, across the sagging boards Eli had set straight with his own hands across the dark patch of earth where her father had buried his secret and left it waiting in the ground. Adelaide looked at the young man with the scar on his hand and the careful, watchful stillness of someone who had learned the hard way that the ground can shift beneath you without warning. And she understood that whatever he was about to tell her, whatever debt or history had brought him up that drive, it was tangled into all of this, somehow into her father, into the land, into the long, quiet plan of a soft-spoken man who had seen the sharks coming half a century before they ever arrived. All right, Eli, she said. Soon. And she turned and looked out at the mountain, at the 8 hidden acres beyond the creek that her father had guarded with concrete and silence, and 30 years of patient, anonymous love. The fight was coming. She could feel it gathering in the cool evening air, the way you can feel a storm before the first cloud crosses the sun. But for the first time in her 64 years, Adelaide Hartwell was not afraid of the fight. She was waiting for it. The thing about a storm is that it never starts where you are looking. It started instead with small things, sharp things, things designed to break a woman's nerve before the real fight ever reached a courtroom. The fence at the back of the property was cut, a clean diagonal slice through the wire. Not a coyote, not a fallen branch. A man with a tool working in the dark. Eli found it on his morning walk of the property line and said nothing until Adelaide came outside with 2 cups of coffee. He just pointed. She looked at the cut at the deliberate angle of it and felt the cold travel up the back of her neck. Then the survey stakes. August. Pierce's office had driven steel markers into the corners of the 8 acres beyond the creek, bright orange flags snapping in the wind. They were pulled up overnight. Adelaide and Eli reset them. They were pulled up again the next night, and the night after that. Then the well house lock, tampered with. Scratched around the keyhole, the hasp bent, as if someone had tested it with a pry bar and given up only because the dawn was coming. And then the article. It appeared in a regional weekly, the kind of small paper that lands on porches across 3 counties. Anonymous source. It claimed Samuel Hartwell had been a tax evader. It claimed he had defrauded the government by extracting and selling minerals he never reported. It claimed his daughter was now using forged documents to lay claim to land that rightfully belonged to the public. Adelaide read it on Eli's phone at the kitchen table. Her hand shook. But only for a second. She set the phone down. She made coffee. She walked outside and looked at the mountain gray and patient against the morning sky. And then she came back in and made 3 phone calls. 1 to August Pierce, 1 to Glinda, and 1 she did not need to make because Eli was already standing in her kitchen, a duffel bag at his feet. "Daly called," he said you might need someone here at night. "You don't have to." "Yes, ma'am, I do." "Eli, I can't pay you what that's worth." "I'm not asking you to." "Why?" He looked away, across the yard, at nothing in particular. His hands hung at his sides, and the scar across the back of his left hand was very still. "You remember I said I'd tell you why I came up here?" She nodded slowly. "I remember." He pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, and for a long moment he was quiet, the way he was always quiet, gathering the words, the way a careful man gathers heavy things. "When my father died, I was 8 years old," he said. "We had nothing. My mother had no money for the funeral. The funeral home wouldn't bury him without payment, wouldn't release the body. My mother sat in that office and cried, and they told her to come back when she had the money." He paused. And then a man walked in, a soft-spoken man. He paid the whole bill in cash, and he left before my mother could even ask his name. The funeral director wouldn't say who it was. Said the man had asked him not to. Adelaide sat very still. "My mother told me the story 100 times over the years," Eli said. "It was the thing she held on to. That somewhere in the world there was a stranger who'd seen us drowning and pulled us out and asked for nothing. She told it like a prayer." He looked up. "It wasn't until I came home after my time in the service that the old funeral director finally told her the name. He was dying himself by then. Figured the secret had been kept long enough." He stopped. "Eli," Adelaide said softly. "Whose name was it?" "Samuel Hartwell." The kitchen went silent. Outside, the wind moved through the pines. Somewhere down the slope, the creek ran on the way it always had. Adelaide had to sit down, though she was already sitting. She put her hand flat on the table to steady herself. Her father, quietly paying for a stranger's funeral. telling no one. Carrying it the way he carried everything alone in a locked drawer in a compartment of his soul that he never opened for anyone. She thought of all the years she had wondered why he was so often away from home, why he came back so tired, why he carried such heaviness in his shoulders. It was not just calcite he had been moving with that borrowed truck and that bad back. It was kindness, quiet, anonymous, expensive kindness that no one was ever supposed to know about. I knew the day Daly sent me up this drive, Eli said, that this was the debt. I've been waiting 24 years to pay it, and I am not leaving this farm until it's safe. Adelaide could not speak. She reached across the table and put her hand over his, over the scar, over the stillness, and the two of them sat there in the gray morning light, bound together by a dead man who had loved them both in the only language he knew. Eli slept in the truck the first night. By the second night, Adelaide made him take the parlor. She gave him an old quilt that had belonged to her mother. She cooked. He chopped wood. He patched the fence the intruder had cut. He walked the property line at midnight with a flashlight and a slow, deliberate pace. The fence was not cut again. The stakes were not pulled. The well house was not touched. Word travels in small towns, and the word that began to travel was this: there is a soldier on the Hartwell farm. Do not test him. It was on the third night that Eli came into the kitchen at dawn and set something on the table. A small black recorder, old, battered, the kind of thing that had been to hard places and come home. Mrs. Hartwell, there's something else I haven't told you. All right. Before I worked construction, before the odd jobs, I was a military police investigator. 10 years. I ran investigations on bases stateside and a couple of overseas training rotations, backgrounds, surveillance, quiet work. I was good at it. He tapped the recorder once. I'm still good at it. She stared at the recorder. What did you do, Elia? 3 weeks ago, I followed Victor Slade to a coffee shop in Harrisburg. I sat at the table behind him. He met another man. They had a long conversation. A pause. I recorded it. That's not legal in every state. Pennsylvania is a one-party consent state, ma'am. I made myself a party to the conversation. I sat down at their table, asked Slade for a sugar packet, made small talk for 30 seconds, went back to my own table. The recording is admissible. She looked at him for a long time. Why did you do this? You were a stranger to me 3 weeks ago. His jaw tightened. Because the day I came up that drive with a crowbar, I knew there were going to be sharks. And I've spent my whole adult life learning what sharks do. What's on the recording? He was quiet for a moment. Slade is taking instructions from another man. A man he calls the husband. That man tells Slade to fabricate documents, to plant the article, to pressure you until you break. Eli looked at her and his voice was very level. I'm not a forensic specialist, ma'am, but to my ear, the voice giving those instructions is consistent with the man who threw you out of your house. Adelaide did not speak. She felt the table under her hands. Solid, old, real. She thought of 26 years of breakfasts, of dinner parties where she had laughed at his jokes, of arguments she had lost because she had been trained somewhere along the way to lose. She thought of the man who had loaded a hidden drawer in an antique bureau with papers designed to erase her. And she thought, "You are not just a bad husband, Russell. You are a thief, and you are about to learn that my father raised me to outlast you." She handed the recorder to August Pierce that afternoon. He listened. He listened for a long time. When the recording ended, he set the device down on his desk and looked at her over the top of his glasses. "Mrs. Hartwell, your case just got significantly stronger. Will it be enough? Combined with your father's documentation, with Opal Greer's letters, with the lab reports, with the chain of custody." He leaned back. "Mrs. Hartwell, this is not a case anymore. This is an autopsy." She did not laugh, but something inside her chest loosened. Then the storm did the thing storms do. It found the place she was not looking. It came on a Tuesday. Pierce called her at 6 in the morning, his soft Pennsylvania accent stripped down to something flat and hard. "We have copies, but a copy is not an original, and Crown's lawyers will stand up in that courtroom and say the original never existed, that we manufactured it, that the whole chain begins with a forgery." Another pause, longer this time. "And there's more. I've been trying to locate the notary who witnessed that 1977 survey to put him on the stand and authenticate the seal. Mrs. Hartwell, he passed away in the spring. There's no one alive who can swear to that stamp." She closed her eyes. The foundation her father had built, the foundation of solid stone. She could feel it shifting under her feet, the way the rocky clay shifts after a hard rain. And then the phone rang again an hour later. "Glenda." Her voice was small and broken in a way Adelaide had never heard from her sharp, furious sister. "Della, it's Opal." Adelaide's heart stopped. "What happened?" "She had a stroke last night. Walt found out from Daly this morning. She's in the hospital in Scranton. They say it's not the worst kind. But she can't talk right, Della. The words won't come. The doctors don't know how much will come back or when." Adelaide sat down hard in the kitchen chair. The video deposition. Pierce had been planning to film Opal's testimony at the end of the week. The 50-year friend, the keeper of every story, the living voice that would make a jury weep and a judge believe. The one witness who could stand between her father's letters and the accusation of forgery and say, "I knew this man. I held these documents. I watched him build this year by year with his own hands." And now Opal lay in a hospital bed, unable to find the words for her own name. The original survey gone. The notary dead. The witness silenced. That afternoon, Victor Slade's lawyers sent over a settlement offer. It was not generous. It was an insult dressed as mercy.
Walk away from the 8 acres. Keep the farmhouse and the original 18. Sign a release. And in exchange, Crown would drop all claims about the irregular deed, and the matter would die quietly.
Adelaide sat at the kitchen table with the settlement papers in front of her. The light came slanting in through the window. Her father's hand pump still ran cold and clear beneath. And for the first time since she had arrived, she felt the old thing creeping back. The exhaustion. The voice that had lived in her for 26 years. The one that whispered, "Just sign. It's easier. You always find a way to survive on less. You're so strong. You can live without it." Her pen hovered over the line, and then she looked up at the cherrywood box on the table beside the papers, at her grandfather's pocket watch, the dead tick, the worn engraving. Time gives. Time takes away. At the framed scrap of plastic and duct tape Eli had set on the windowsill from the broken parlor window she had sealed with her own bleeding hands that first terrible night. And she heard her father's voice, the way she had heard it reading his letter. "Do not let the sharks take it for nothing. This land is your shield, my girl." She set the pen down. She did not sign. Instead, she picked up the phone and called August Pierce.
"They sent a settlement," she said. "They think we're broken. The survey's gone. Opal's in the hospital, the notary's dead, and they think that means it's over."
Her voice was steady now, steadier than it had been in days. "Mr. Pierce, my father was the most careful man who ever lived. He built this to last 100 years. He did not leave one copy of one document in one place and call it a fortress. There is more. I know there is more. He told Opal there were compartments, drawers within drawers. We just haven't found them all yet." There was a long silence on the line.
"Mrs. Hartwell," Pierce said slowly, "when you say drawers, the cherrywood box, did Opal ever tell you whether your father gave her everything at once, or whether there might be instructions inside it that we missed?"
Adelaide looked at the cherrywood box. They had read the letters. They had cataloged the documents. But they had read them as evidence hunting for dates and amounts. They had never read them as a man speaking to his daughter from beyond the grave, leaving her one last set of directions. "I'll call you back," she said. She opened the cherrywood box. She took out the letters one by one, and this time she read them slowly. Not for the dates, for the voice. And on the back of the very last letter, the one her father had written latest, the ink, the freshest, there was a paragraph she had skimmed past before, because it had read like an old man's sentiment. "Della, I never trusted just one hiding place. A house can burn, a friend can pass, a box can be stolen. So I did what my own father taught me. I made copies and I scattered them like seeds in soil I trusted. The most important seed I planted in the safest ground in the county. The courthouse itself. 12 years ago, I had every document witnessed, fresh, sealed, and lodged under seal with the county recorder in a private deposit registered under the Hartwell estate. They have been sitting in the public vault all this time untouched, waiting for a daughter with the standing to ask for them. The clerk has the registration number in the estate file. Ask, and the mountain will answer.
Adelaide read it 3 times, and then she laughed a sharp, surprised, watery laugh that turned into something almost like a sob. Because her father had not just buried treasure behind brambles. He had not just trusted his oldest friend with a box. He had walked into the county courthouse 12 years ago, a soft-spoken man in a worn coat, and he had locked the truth inside the one building no thief could break into and no fire could burn. He had foreseen the stolen survey. He had foreseen the dead notary. He had foreseen the broken witness. He had foreseen all of it decades before the sharks ever caught the scent. He had not left her a copy. He had left her an original, sealed, witnessed, lodged in the public record, beyond the reach of any man with a pry bar or a lawyer or 18 years of patience. She called Pierce back. She read him the paragraph. He was quiet for so long she thought the line had dropped. "Mrs. Hartwell," he finally said, "in 40 years I have never seen a man plan a case better than this, and he was not even a lawyer." A pause. "Give me 3 days. I'll pull the sealed deposit, and when I do, they have nothing. The stolen survey doesn't matter. The dead notary doesn't matter, because the originals were certified and locked away by the recorder's own hand, and that no jury will ever doubt." The settlement papers went into the cast-iron stove that evening. Adelaide watched them burn. She drove to the hospital in Scranton the next morning. Opal was propped up in the bed, smaller than ever, the white hair thin against the pillow. Half her face was slack, but her eyes were still sharp. They found Adelaide the moment she stepped through the door, and they filled with tears. Adelaide sat down beside the bed and took the old woman's trembling hand. "I found it, Opal," she whispered. "The courthouse. He told me about the courthouse. He thought of everything. He thought of all of it, even this." She pressed her forehead to the old woman's hand. "We're going to win. You don't have to carry it anymore. You held it for 26 years, and you did exactly what he asked, and now I'm going to carry it the rest of the way. You just rest. You just come back to us slow." Opal's slack mouth worked. The words would not come, but her good hand closed around Adelaide's fierce and certain, and her sharp old eyes said everything her ruined voice could not. And then, over the following days, the words began to come back, slowly, a syllable at a time. The doctors called it remarkable for her age. Adelaide called it Opal. By the end of the week, when Pierce came with a camera and a quiet manner and the patience of a man who understood exactly what he was filming, Opal Greer could speak again. Not perfectly, but enough. She sat up in her hospital bed, the wool shawl that Glinda had brought from the blue house draped around her shoulders, and she told the story of Samuel Hartwell the way only a 50-year friend could tell it. Slowly, carefully, with the weight of a long lifetime behind every word. And when she finished, even the young hospital aide standing in the corner had to wipe her eyes. Russell came in the second week of November, alone. No SUV, no driver, no suit. Just an old sedan coming up the dirt drive at sunset slowly, as if uncertain it had the right to be there. Adelaide was on the porch snapping green beans into a metal bowl, the last beans from the small kitchen garden Glinda had helped her plant in August. Eli stepped out of the parlor and stood behind the screen door, saying nothing. Russell got out of the car. He looked terrible. He had lost weight. His shirt was wrinkled. His hair was thinner than she remembered. He had not shaved in days. He stood at the bottom of the porch steps. He did not come up. He did not have the nerve. Adelaide. She did not look up from her beans. Russell. A long silence. He shifted his weight. He cleared his throat. My brother's firm collapsed. The fund, last week. Federal investigators came on Monday. They're looking at me too. All of it. She kept snapping the beans. Snap, snap, snap. I'm going to lose everything, Adelaide. The house, the trust, all of it. Snap. I'm sorry. She set the bowl down. She looked at him for the first time. He looked old, smaller than she remembered, like a balloon a week after the party. You're not sorry, Russell. You're caught. You're not sorry that you spent 18 years preparing to erase me. You're sorry that the federal government found you before you could finish. Adelaide, please. You sent a man to this farm to take this land. You sent him before you'd even thrown me out. You sent him while I was ironing your shirts, while I was telling people you were a good man. I made mistakes. You made choices. Mistakes are accidents. You spent 18 years making choices. He looked at the porch boards. He had nothing to say to that, because there was nothing to say. But she was not done. And this time, she did not wait for him to grovel his way toward the question. She stood up. She set the bowl of beans on the rail. And she walked to the top of the porch steps, not down to him, never down to him. He was not worth descending for. You want to know the part I figured out, Russell? The part that took me longest? Her voice was very quiet. You didn't find out about this land last year, or even 5 years ago. You knew about the white gold a long time ago, because there was a lab report from a Scranton lab, and somewhere along the way, a copy of it crossed your desk through a contact, through a county record. I don't know how yet, but the federal investigators will. And the day you understood what was sleeping under this mountain was the day you started planning the trust. 18 years ago,
The same year you started telling people I had no head for business and should leave the money to you.
Russell's face went white. You didn't marry a tired woman and decide one morning to throw her away, Adelaide said. You married a woman whose father owned a mountain made of money, and you spent 26 years waiting for the right moment to take it. The marriage was never the deal, Russell. The marriage was the long con, and I was the cover story. He opened his mouth, closed it, and in his silence she saw that she was right. She saw the whole shape of it at last. 26 years of her life reframed in a single sunset. Every kindness she had ever done him laid over a foundation of theft. Adelaide, you came here to ask for something, she said. So ask. He looked up. His eyes were wet. I don't know how to start over. I don't know how to be alone. Welcome to 60, she said. It's not as frightening as you'd think. I've been doing it for 3 months. He flinched. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Adelaide. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. I really am. She looked at him for a long, long moment. Behind the screen door, Eli stood very still. The sun was sliding behind the ridge, and the light on Russell's face was orange and brief. She felt something inside her settle. Not peace, not yet, but a kind of stillness. Russell, listen carefully because I'll only say this once. He looked up at her. I am not angry at you anymore. Anger requires that I still see you as someone who could have been better. I don't. I see you as you are. A pause. I do not hate you. I do not love you. I do not forgive you. But I do not need to forgive you in order to walk away from you. Do you understand the difference? He stared at her. She stared back. You are not going to be the lesson at the end of my life, Russell. You are just the door I had to walk through to get to the rest of it. His face crumpled for a moment. Just a moment. He looked like a man who had finally understood something. He turned. He walked back to the sedan. He opened the door. He paused. For what it's worth, he said, your father was right about you. She did not ask what he meant. She did not need to. He got in the car. He drove away. The dust hung in the dirt drive long after the taillights disappeared. She stood on the porch. She picked up the bowl of beans, and she kept snapping. Snap, snap, snap. Because life goes on, with or without ghosts. The trial began on a cold Tuesday in November. The courthouse in Scranton was old marble columns, heavy wooden doors, a clock that had been keeping time since 1898, and was not impressed by any of them. Adelaide wore a navy dress, simple, the kind of dress a woman wears when she does not want to be looked at, only listened to. Glinda sat behind her. Walt
beside Glinda. Marlowe, who had taken 3 days off work and driven up the night before, who had wept on the phone 2 weeks earlier and said, "Mom, I should have come. I should have been there," sat on Glinda's other side, holding her aunt's hand across the aisle. The Crown lawyers sat at their table, 6 of them in dark suits with expensive briefcases. August Pierce sat at the plaintiff's table alone, his one old leather briefcase beside him. He looked across at the 6 lawyers. He almost smiled. "Ready, Mrs. Hartwell?" "Ready, Mr. Pierce." Crown went first. They argued for 2 hours. They were polished. They were aggressive. They suggested the 1977 survey was a forgery and made much of the fact that no original could be produced and no living notary could authenticate it. They suggested Otis Fells had never existed. They suggested the lab reports were doctored. They suggested Adelaide was the unstable ex-wife of a man currently under federal investigation. They suggested the entire claim was a fraud invented to console a woman for her divorce. The judge, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and the patient eyes of someone who had seen every trick in the book, listened without comment. She took notes. She did not interrupt. When Crown finished, she said, "Mr. Pierce, your response." August. Pierce stood up. He buttoned his brown suit jacket. He walked to the podium, and he began with a voice as quiet and patient as a creek running over old stones. "Your Honor, my client does not have to prove a forgery because there is no forgery, and opposing counsel has built their entire argument on a missing original and a deceased notary, as though my client's case rested on a single sheet of paper kept in an unlocked drawer." A pause. It did not, because the man who built this case was the most careful man who ever walked these hills. "Allow me to begin." And then he destroyed them. He produced a certified record from the county recorder's office, a sealed deposit lodged 12 years earlier under the Hartwell estate, opened in open court at the judge's order, witnessed and authenticated by the recorder's own staff. Inside it, the originals. Fresh witnessed copies of the 1977 survey. The lab reports. The deed corrections. All of it certified and locked away by a public official long before any dispute existed beyond the reach of any thief. The Crown lawyers shifted in their seats. He produced the cherrywood box and the 30 years of letters, every survey notarized, every report witnessed, every sale documented, every milestone certified by a notary public. Many of them dead now, but their seals on the paper and their signatures in the records of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. He called Hank Daly, who testified for 40 minutes. He had known Samuel Hartwell for 30 years. He had personally seen him sell calcite small loads by the truckful to 17 different local contractors over the decades. He named them. He named the years. He named the prices. The Crown lawyers shifted again. He played Opal Greer's video deposition. Her old face appeared on the screen, the wool shawl around her shoulders, the words coming slow but steady. She told the story of Samuel Hartwell, the way only a 50-year friend could tell it without drama, without self-importance, the way old women tell true stories. By the time the video ended, 2 members of the jury had wiped their eyes. And then August Pierce played the recording. The judge listened. The room listened. You could hear Victor Slade in a coffee shop in Harrisburg receiving instructions from a voice. A voice telling him to fabricate documents, to plant articles, to pressure a 64-year-old woman until she broke. A voice that the audio expert testifying 2 days later under accepted forensic standards would identify as consistent with Russell Calloway. The Crown lawyers did not even bother with the meaningful closing argument. They knew. The whole room knew. It was over. The judge ruled 3 days later. The 8 acres were legally part of the Hartwell estate. The mineral rights were confirmed. The chain of custody was unbroken. Samuel Hartwell's careful decades-long preparation had held exactly as he had built it to. Crown Land Group was fined heavily. Victor Slade was indicted on 5 counts of fraud and 1 count of attempted extortion. And Russell Calloway, named already in the federal proceedings that Adelaide herself had set in motion when she carried that recorder and a copy of the ledger into the U.S. Attorney's office in Scranton, with her own 2 hands, would hear the same recording played in a different courtroom with very different consequences. She did not need to be the one to throw the final stone. She had simply handed the truth to the people whose job it was to throw it. And then she had walked back up her own mountain and let the law do what the law does. Adelaide did not attend that second trial. She had a farm to run. The journalists came. She refused them all. A regional television station offered to film a story. A national magazine called twice. An author wrote her a letter asking to write her book. She said no to everyone. When Pierce asked her why, she shrugged. I did not survive Russell Calloway and Victor Slade to spend the rest of my life being the woman who survived them. I'm a woman who lives on a farm. That's enough. He nodded slowly. He understood. The contracts came too. Bigger ones, national conglomerates, international mining firms. They offered millions, tens of millions in some cases. Adelaide read every offer carefully the way her father would have read them. And then she set every one of them aside. She gathered her family at the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon in early December. Glenda, Walt, Marlo, Eli, August Pierce, who had become more friend than counsel, and Opal home from the hospital, now walking with a cane, her speech slow, but her mind as sharp as ever, driven over by Hank Daly in his old station wagon. Adelaide poured coffee. She set the offers in a stack and tapped them with one finger. Daddy didn't leave us this land to make us rich. He left us this land to make us free. There's a difference. Glenda's eyes filled. Marlo reached for her mother's hand. What do you want to do, Mom? Adelaide smiled for the first time in 26 years. She smiled the way her father used to smile. Quiet. Certain. From a place no one could reach but her. I want to keep the mountain whole. She signed a small contract with the local family of stoneworkers, 4 generations of quarrymen in the northern hills. They knew the creeks. They knew how to take what was needed
without taking what was sacred. The contract specified limited extraction, no more than 2 acres worked at a time. Reforestation water table protection, no blasting near the creek. A share of the profit returned to the land through a trust-managed conservation fund. Enough to keep Adelaide, Glinda, Marlowe, and Eli secure for the rest of their lives. But not rich. Never rich. Because rich was what Russell had wanted. And Adelaide did not need to want what Russell had wanted. She had buried that woman in the gravel of a motel parking lot in Virginia she would never see again.
The farmhouse was rebuilt that winter, not torn down, not modernized beyond recognition, restored. The sagging porch lifted and reset. The broken shutters matched to the originals. A new cedar roof, a wood-burning stove, and a small electric one beside it. But the iron bed frame stayed. The hand pump stayed. And the cracked parlor window was replaced. But the plastic and the duct tape were preserved in a small frame on the wall above the words, "This is what we started with."
She started the Mountain Remembers Fund on a quiet Tuesday in May. She did not name it after her father. She did not name it after herself. She named it after the truth. It supported 3 things in this order: women over 50 who had been abandoned, abused, or erased by the men they trusted; emergency housing legal aid, a clean motel room, and $80 to start; older women who wanted to return to school; and family farms in the Appalachian foothills fighting corporate predation. Glinda ran the finances. Marlowe ran the communications. Eli ran the security. And Opal Greer was the honorary chair of the board. She did not have to come to a single meeting. She only had to know that the work was being done in her name and in Samuel's, and in the names of all the soft-spoken people who had carried things too long without ever being thanked.
A year passed, then another season. October came again, the leaves turning gold and red on the ridge, the creek running low and clear.
On a warm afternoon, the kind Pennsylvania saves for women who have earned it. Adelaide sat on the wide new wraparound porch. Beside her sat Opal, 79, now a little frailer, but still sharp, still patient, still the keeper of every story Adelaide had ever needed to know. The 2 women drank tea and watched the light shift on the mountain, and they did not always speak because they did not need to.
In the yard, Marlowe was teaching Eli's young nephew how to whistle through a blade of grass. The boy laughed every time he failed. Marlowe laughed every time he tried. Glinda was inside arguing with Walt about whether the apple pie needed more cinnamon. Hank Daly sat on the front step telling lies about his last fishing trip to anyone who would listen. And Eli was in the small workshop he had built at the edge of the property, working on an engine, singing softly. He had begun to sing this year. Adelaide did not know what had unlocked it. She did not ask. Opal set down her teacup. She looked at Adelaide. She reached over and took her hand. "Della, yes, you did it. We did it. Your father is proud." "I know.
a small silence. The wind moved through the pines. Della, Opal said the words slow but sure. I have lived in this valley for 79 years. I have seen many women come up that drive with nothing in their hands and nothing in their eyes, and I have seen most of them leave the same way they came. She squeezed. You're the first one I ever saw come up that drive with nothing and leave the right way without leaving at all. Adelaide did not answer. She just held the old woman's hand the way you hold something you have spent your whole life waiting to hold. That evening, after Opal had been driven home and the dishes were washed and Marlowe had gone to bed and Eli had walked the property line one last time, Adelaide stood alone on the porch. The sun went down behind the ridge. The first star appeared. Then another, then 100. She thought of the woman who had stood on a sidewalk in suburban Virginia with a squeaking suitcase and $80 in her pocket. She wanted to reach back through time and put a hand on that woman's shoulder. She wanted to tell her, "You will not believe what's coming. You will not believe how far this goes. You will not believe who you become." But that woman had to walk the road herself, because that is the only way any of us walks it. We do not get rescued from our lives. We grow into them. We bury the women and the men we used to be in the soft, cold ground of our own choosing, and we plant new ones in their places. People who know their names. People who know where they stand. People who will not be moved, not by any door that closes, not by any drawer that opens, not by any black SUV that comes up the drive. She thought of her father, Samuel Hartwell, the soft-spoken man who had spent 30 years preparing for a day he would not live to see, who had buried a metal box in concrete behind a thicket of brambles, who had locked the truth in a courthouse vault 12 years before the sharks ever came, who had paid for a stranger's funeral and told no one for 24 years, who had handed a cherrywood box to a 50-year friend and said, "When my Della comes home, you'll know what to do." A man who had loved her in the only language he knew, the language of stone, of soil, of land that does not lie. She whispered into the dark, "Daddy, I'm home." The wind moved through the pines. The stars above the ridge were old and bright and steady. The mountain held its silence the way it had always held its silence. For her, because white gold is not buried in the limestone of a Pennsylvania mountain. White gold is buried in the courage of a woman who dares to stand up one more time after everything has fallen. It is the choice of freedom over wealth, of dignity over revenge. It is the friend who guards your inheritance for 26 years and waits for you to walk up her road. It is the silent man with the shovel who paid a stranger's debt and told no one for half his life. It is the daughter who finally learns that strength is not the absence of asking for help, but the willingness to. We are not the ghosts of our worst days.
We are the architects of our own redemption, standing at last on solid ground in a life that is finally, truly our own. The mountain remembers her name. It always did, even when she had forgotten it herself.